Welcome to another Build Insights video. Today, we'll be taking a look at the build-out for the Circus Flaminius in Rome. This is the first subsection of Phase 3 in my years-long effort to recreate all of the ancient city, circa mid-4th century CE. Overall, this subsection consists of over 11,000 bricks, bringing the running total for the entire SPQR diorama to 222,000 bricks. Thank you to all my members on Patreon who are seeing these build insights several weeks earlier than my general audience. Patrons also get insights into the design process for my work, and the design insights for the Circus Flaminius were shared all the way back in November 2024. If you'd like to become a member and get access to all this and much more, you'll find a link in the description. With all my landscape dioramas, I start at the lowest elevation and work my way up and out from there. SPQR Phase 3 returns to where I started this project several years ago at the Tiber River, which is the elevational 0 point for the overall piece. The riverbed is a mere 2 plates thick and is covered in dark green plates. There's some mixing of Lego and Go bricks here, but it's actually the inconsistency of the Lego plates which accounts for the slight color variations. Funnily enough, I actually used a bit of water to clean off the dust which had built up between the studs of the used plates. Next up, I started placing transparent plates and tiles somewhat randomly along the riverbed. I like the way a single layer of transparent elements result in a slightly diffused shade of green for the Tiber. It also helps to add some texture by including both plates and tiles for an uneven surface of the water. The Tiber River flowed right through the center of ancient Rome, just like it does today. Some of the bridges we see today were built atop ruins of ancient crossings, like the one seen here. This bridge is either the Pons Valentiniani or the Pons Aurelius. It's not quite clear exactly which one. What is clear, though, is that the remains of the ancient bridge form the foundations for the Ponte Sisto, a 14th century bridge built under Pope Sixtus IV, which still stands today, though it is limited to pedestrian traffic only. The rest of this segment of the Tiber River was finished off by a series of docks, which would have provided access to warehouses or Heraea for goods sent up the river from the port of Ostia. The opposite bank of the Tiber was known as Trans-Tiberium, but we'll save that for a future phase of this project. For now, our sights are set on the monumental Campus Martius. The area along the banks of this segment of the Tiber was known as the Circus Flaminius, which was also the name for the entire Regio 9, the ancient Roman administrative region in which all of Phase 3 is situated. The region roughly corresponds to the Campo dei Fiori we know today. The subsections throughout all of the SPQR diorama seldom share rectilinear borders. More often, the boundaries are angled to adjust for specific landmarks or specific street grids above. In the case of the Circus Flaminius, a thin strip of shoreline borders the Tiber at one angle, then it's attached to the prevailing subsection grid further inland. These connection points have typically consisted of hinge plates and carefully aligned bar and plate connections, but one new connection that's new for Phase 3 is using single plates or bricks to span the gaps. In this case, it's a 1x3 arch brick that provides an extra connection near the edges of the two grids. In addition to connections made in the layers yet to be added above, there are at least a dozen points where the two grids are securely interlocked. The site that would eventually become the Circus Flaminius was once a swampy marshland, not unlike the rest of Rome in the lowlands beneath the hills. During the days of the Roman kingdom, the area was considered to be outside the city, but was eventually granted to a handful of priests, among whom were members of the eponymous Flamini family. Along with religious proceedings, the Circus Flaminius came to be known more for its use as, well, a circus. The area was a site for ludi and also a stop along the way during state ceremonies like triumphal parades. During the later years of antiquity, it's clear that the area was paved in travertine and rendered much more multi-purpose as a result. The first major landmark to be added to my depiction of the Circus Flaminius is the Ides Castores in Circo, or the Temple of Castor and Pollux in the Circus. This mid-sized temple was dedicated circa 70 BCE, so it would have been several centuries old as depicted here in the mid-4th century CE. The Temple of Castor and Pollux may have been built under one Quintus Caecilius Metellus Pius, bit of a mouthful, and perhaps in commemoration of his friend Sulla's conquest of Spain in 71 BCE. The temple featured a transverse cell as well as two colossal statues of the Dioscuri. These twin brothers were discovered during excavations on the site in 1560 and were placed atop the ramp leading up to the Campidoglio on the Capitoline Hill, after which they became known as the Capitoline Dioscuri. You can still see these statues of Castor and Pollux today, not too far from the temple they once adorned. A pair of triumphal arches were erected at the far end of the Circus Flaminius around the turn of the millennium from BCE to CE. The arch shown here was likely the Arch of Drusus, referring either to Germanicus' father, Drusus the Elder, or his nephew, Drusus Julius Caesar. Unfortunately, we don't have much information to go off for proper identification, but we can safely guess the arch would have been given appropriate placement along the triumphal procession route. Next up is the Arch of Germanicus, decreed by the Senate in 19 CE. This arch commemorated the victories of its namesake, Germanicus Julius Caesar, who avenged the disaster of the Teutoburg Forest during his campaigns in Germania. We know from iconography on contemporary coins that the arch was topped by 12 gilded statues, with pride of place given to Germanicus. On the other side of the Circus Flaminius, there stood a third triumphal arch presiding over the aforementioned bridge. This was the Arcus Valentiniani, dedicated in the late 4th century CE to the urban prefect Symmachus under the patronage of the co-emperors and brothers Valentinian and Valens. The two bronze statues on top of the arch would have depicted the two emperor brothers. It might be a little bit anachronistic to include a late 4th century landmark here, but I think there's always room for some artistic license for the sake of showing ancient Rome at its height. Archaeological excavations in the Circus Flaminius area have revealed the remains of a public porticus which once stood directly on the pavement, right along the triumphal route. The porticus had 2 rows of perimeter columns and stood 2 levels high, featuring a facade with arches framed by semi-columns. The design of the porticus on the circus is rather straightforward, but features slight contrasts like light nougat bricks on the upper level, separated by a thin layer of tan plates from the white bricks on the first level. 4 holes in the roof would have provided light and air into the otherwise dark interior of the second floor. Light wells like these were actually fairly common among Roman buildings with broad interiors, and this method of using inverted bricks for these details is one that I first employed back in Phase 1 for the Temple of Apollo on the Palatine Hill. The construction of miscellaneous and otherwise nondescript buildings throughout the city are just as interesting as those of the landmarks. Here we can see one of the many domus that were strewn throughout ancient Rome. Domus were luxurious dwellings which typically featured central courtyards and lavishly adorned interiors with painted walls, floor mosaics, and perhaps even exotic marble or stone columns. As you can imagine, the residents here would have been rather well off, but with so much space on the interior, the family's household slaves would have also been residents. A common sight in the Circus Flaminius would have been herrea, or warehouses used to store goods brought into the capital from across the vast empire. Herrea were often just 2 stories and featured interior ramps rather than stairs for easier storage and to keep goods off the frequently flooded ground floor. Some herrea were amalgamated into large arcades or shopping precincts, which was likely the case so close to the Tiber. The archaeological evidence also supports this idea. The overwhelming majority of buildings in ancient Rome would have been the insula. Insulae were basically multi-story tenements in which most of the city's million inhabitants would have lived in abject poverty. If you were walking in the street during the day, you'd have to be careful you weren't killed by a chamber pot flung from the upper stories. If you could afford a lower floor apartment, you'd likely be up at all hours of the night as creaking and clacking carriages weren't allowed in the streets during the day. If you managed to find lodgings in a dreary upper floor unit, you'd be lucky to escape in time if one of the many frequent fires engulfed your neighborhood. All that said, I find the endless insulae to be some of the most varied and characteristic buildings throughout the entire diorama. The final details in the Circus Flaminius subsection include the ship of Aeneas, which is said to have landed here on the banks of the Tiber. The bireme depicted here is probably apocryphal, as was the real ship that was displayed at the supposed landing place. But it was a valuable bit of propaganda for Augustus, whose friend Virgil wrote the Aeneid. You can actually buy Aeneas's bireme as a kit with instructions on my website shop. Just go to roccobutliere.com/shop. The next addition was a rooftop pergola for one of the domus. This makes use of a technique I actually developed for the US Botanic Garden in my 2024 piece depicting Capitol Hill. The finishing touches were the trees of the Aesculetum, a sacred oak grove along the bend in the river, where the Senate passed the Lex Hortensia in 282 BCE. This decree effectively settled the 3-century feud between patricians and plebeians, which cemented the political power of the Roman people. I hope you enjoyed these insights into the Circus Flaminius. If you'd like to support my work, please consider becoming a member on Patreon. And if you'd like to see the diorama in person, you can catch the debut of Phase 3 later this year at an upcoming event in Rome, so stay tuned for more info on that shortly. Thanks for following along. I'll see you in the next one.